All right, everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going deep on something we've been getting a ton of questions about, uh, fasting and infections.
It's definitely a hot topic right now, that's for sure.
Yeah, and we've got some interesting stuff to dig into. You guys sent in a YouTube video from Dr. Berg. He's like all about fasting when you're sick.
Hmm.
And we've also got articles from Healthline and Medical News Today. They've got some different takes on it, too.
Yeah, there are definitely some strong opinions out there. So I think our mission today is to sort through all the noise and see what the science actually tells us.
Exactly. Now, before we jump into the nitty-gritty,
Yeah.
I think it's important to clarify what we even mean by fasting. Like, we've all skipped a meal here and there, right?
Right.
But it seems like there are all sorts of different ways to fast.
Oh, absolutely. Fasting can mean a lot of things. So let's break it down just so everyone's on the same page.
Okay, sounds good.
So first off, we have absolute fasting. And that's like the hardcore version. No food, no drinks, nothing. Usually only for a short time, though.
Makes sense.
Then you have water fasting, which is pretty straightforward.
Just water, yeah.
Yep. Only water allowed.
Like those cleanse things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a cleanse. Then there are juice fasts, where you're only drinking fruit and veggie juices.
Okay.
And then there's intermittent fasting, which has gotten super popular lately.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that one.
Yeah, it's all about cycling between periods of eating and fasting, sometimes for a whole day even.
So, like, if you skip breakfast every day, that's technically a mini fast, right?
That's right. It all comes down to giving your digestive system a break.
Interesting. So let's get down to business. Does fasting actually help you fight off infections?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. And Dr. Berg, the guy from the YouTube video, he seems pretty convinced that fasting is the way to go for LAY infection.
Yeah, he's definitely a big believer in that. He even plays this clip of himself saying every time you get an infection, you should be fasting. I mean, he makes a strong case.
Yeah, wow, that's pretty intense. But wouldn't that be kind of risky for some people? Like, what if they're already feeling weak?
That's a good point. Plus, those articles from Healthline and Medical News Today, they suggest that our bodies might actually be onto something when we lose our appetite while we're sick.
You mean like it's a natural response?
Exactly. Like maybe our system is telling us, hey, focus all your energy on healing, not on digesting a giant meal.
It's like our bodies have this ancient wisdom, right?
Right. It's kind of fascinating. Like back in the day when our ancestors got sick, conserving energy would have been key for survival.
So maybe our bodies just haven't caught up to the 21st century and our 24/7 access to food.
Maybe, maybe not. But then there's this Yale study that really throws a wrench in the starve of fever idea. They found that giving mice glucose actually helped them fight off viruses.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's the opposite of what you'd expect, right? I mean, that kind of makes you rethink the whole thing.
Yeah, it does. So how do they explain that?
Well, what's really interesting is that while the glucose helped with viral infections, it actually made things worse for mice with bacterial infections.
So it's not as simple as fasting is always good or fasting is always bad.
Exactly. It seems like the type of infection really matters. And the researchers think this has to do with how our bodies deal with inflammation. Bacterial and viral infections trigger different types of inflammatory responses, and it seems like glucose might fuel one type but hinder the other.
So it's like our bodies might need different fuel sources depending on what we're up against.
That's right.
Okay, that's wild. Now, Dr. Berg also talks a lot about ketones.
Ah, yes, ketones. He's really into those, isn't he?
Yeah, he says they're like super powerful for fighting bacteria.
Right, and his argument is that when you fast, your body starts burning fat for energy, and that produces ketones.
Okay, so it's like fasting triggers this whole chain reaction that leads to these bacteria-fighting ketones.
Exactly. He believes that ketones have these, what are they called? Antimicrobial properties?
Antimicrobial.
Yeah, basically it means they can directly attack those nasty microbes.
So it's like having an internal army fueled by ketones.
That's a great way to put it. Now, when we talk about the immune system, we can't forget about T cells and B cells.
Right, those are the big guns.
Absolutely. They're essential for a strong immune response. Think of T cells as the generals, coordinating the attack and targeting infected cells directly.
I like that analogy. And B cells.
B cells are like the weapon factories. They produce antibodies, which are basically like guided missiles that seek out and destroy specific invaders.
Wow, our bodies are so cool. But wait, doesn't Dr. Berg say that fasting can actually increase the survival of those cells?
He does. But he also acknowledges that when you first start fasting, your white blood cell count actually drops.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
He explains this by saying that those cells are actually retreating to the bone marrow and gut to, like, recharge.
Like they're going back to base camp to regroup.
Exactly. And then they come back stronger and ready to fight.
It's like our bodies are strategically planning their defense.
Yeah.
It's amazing how complex our immune systems are.
I know, right? It's like a perfectly choreographed dance. Now, Dr. Berg also talks about this process called autophagy.
Autophagy, that's the one that sounds kind of intense.
Yeah, it can be a little hard to wrap your head around. Imagine your cells have these tiny recycling bins. Autophagy is like taking out the trash, breaking down old parts so they can be reused.
So it's like spring cleaning for your cells.
Exactly. It's our body's way of cleaning up damaged or unnecessary components, including old or dysfunctional immune cells.
It's like our bodies are doing their own Marie Kondo routine. Maybe I should try that with my closet.
Haha, maybe. But seriously, the idea is that fasting could be like giving our immune cells a fresh start by clearing out all the clutter.
Okay, that makes sense. But with all this talk about potential benefits, what about the practical side of things? Like, if someone is thinking about trying this, what should they keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, they should talk to their doctor, especially if they have any underlying health conditions. Both Healthline and Medical News Today really emphasize that.
Yeah, it's always good to get professional advice before making any big changes. So I guess it's not all sunshine and roses with fasting, right? What are some of the red flags people should watch out for?
Well, the Medical News Today article mentions a few potential downsides, like muscle pain, fatigue, headaches, and even trouble sleeping. These tend to happen in the beginning as your body gets used to using different energy sources.
So you might feel worse before you feel better. Not exactly the most appealing side effect. And I have to ask, is it ever a bad idea to eat when you're sick? Like, what if your body's actually craving food?
That's a great question, and I think if you have an appetite and genuinely feel like eating, then nutritious food can definitely give your body the energy and nutrients it needs to support your immune system.
So listening to your body is key.
Absolutely. If it's screaming for chicken noodle soup, there's probably a reason. And the Healthline article actually talks about the benefits of specific foods during illness, like chicken soup. It's got fluids, electrolytes, and nutrients, and warm broths can help with congestion. And if you're feeling nauseous, bland foods that are easy to digest can be a good option.
Yeah, it's like food can be medicine in its own way. But going back to Dr. Berg, he also recommends certain supplements during infection. Things like vitamin D, oregano oil, garlic, and olive leaf extract. And he's very specific about taking these on an empty stomach, along with the fasting.
Right, and that brings up another important point. There's the potential for interactions between fasting, supplements, and medications. And that's another reason why talking to your doctor is so crucial. Fasting can change how your body absorbs and processes substances, so getting personalized advice is really important.
It's like you're creating a custom health plan.
Right.
You need to know which ingredients work well together and which ones might clash.
Exactly. It's like a recipe. The instructions need to be tailored to your individual needs. What works for one person might not work for another.
So I guess what we're saying is fasting can be a powerful tool, but it's not a magic bullet.
Right. It's important to approach it with caution and a healthy dose of skepticism. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've looked at the claims, reviewed the research, and emphasized the importance of personalized medical advice.
And I think we've sparked some curiosity in our listeners, too. This is just the beginning of the conversation.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more to explore.
And speaking of exploring, are there certain people who might be more vulnerable during fasting? Like, should anyone avoid it altogether?
That's a crucial point. The Medical News Today article specifically cautions against fasting for people with certain chronic conditions like diabetes or those taking regular medications. Again, this is where a doctor's guidance is absolutely essential.
So it's like we're saying fasting might be helpful, but with a giant asterisk next to it. And that asterisk basically says, talk to your doctor.
Exactly. Context and individualization are key.
Well, I think we've done a pretty thorough job of analyzing this topic.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway here is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. What works for one person might not work for another. And what's helpful for one type of infection might be completely different for another.
Right. It's all about that personalized approach.
Exactly. Listening to your body, understanding the nuances of different types of fasting, and most importantly, consulting with your doctor, those are the key ingredients for making informed choices.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We always want to empower our listeners with knowledge, but also encourage them to seek guidance from qualified healthcare professionals.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between informed self-care and recognizing when professional expertise is needed.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. From those ancient sayings about feeding colds and starving fevers to the latest scientific research, it's been quite a journey.
And the journey continues. There's still so much to learn about the complex relationship between fasting, our immune systems, and overall health.
Which means there will be plenty more deep dives to come. We're always on the lookout for fascinating topics to explore with our amazing listeners.
So until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep listening to your body. It's the wisest guide you'll ever have.
And don't forget to share your thoughts, experiences, and any burning questions you have in the comments below. We love hearing from you.
Until next time, stay healthy and keep diving deep.
Oh man, I can already feel a headache coming on. So is it ever, like, a bad idea to eat when you're sick? What if you're actually, like, hungry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, if you genuinely feel like eating, and you have an appetite, nutritious food can definitely give your body what it needs to, support your immune system and fight off that bug.
So it really comes down to listening to your body, huh?
Exactly. If your body's saying, hey, I need some chicken noodle soup, there's probably a good reason for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of chicken noodle soup, the Healthline article actually mentions that, right?
They do. It's funny how some of these, old wives' tales actually have some scientific backing.
So it's like grandma knew best all along.
Maybe so. But yeah, they talk about how chicken soup can provide fluids and electrolytes and nutrients, and warm broth can help with congestion, too.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And if you're feeling, like, nauseous, they recommend sticking to bland foods that are easy on the stomach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No one wants to be dealing with an upset stomach on top of everything else.
Right. Now, Dr. Berg, he also talks about certain supplements you should be taking during an infection.
Yeah, he's a big proponent of vitamin D, oregano oil, garlic, and olive leaf extract.
Yeah. He's very specific about taking those on an empty stomach, too, along with the fasting.
Right, and that's something to be really careful with. I mean, we've got to remember that fasting can change how your body absorbs and processes things. So taking supplements or medications while fasting could have some unexpected effects.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like you don't want to mix up your ingredients and end up with a weird reaction.
Exactly. It's really important to talk to your doctor about any supplements or medications you're taking, especially if you're considering fasting.
Okay, so it's all about personalized advice again, right? What works for one person might not work for another.
Absolutely. Everyone's body is different, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to health.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at the claims, we've reviewed the research, and we've emphasized the importance of, getting personalized medical advice.
Yeah, and I think it's clear that the relationship between fasting and infections is complex. There's still a lot we don't know, and more research is definitely needed.
Right. Like that Yale study really threw me for a loop.
I know. It's amazing how science can challenge our assumptions, like that whole starve a fever, feed a cold thing.
Yeah, it's definitely not as straightforward as we used to think.
Exactly. So, what are your biggest takeaways from this deep dive? What are you going to do next time you feel a cold coming on?
That's a good question. I think I'll definitely be more mindful about listening to my body. Like, if I'm not hungry, I'm not going to force myself to eat.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. And if you do decide to try fasting, definitely talk to your doctor first, especially if you have any underlying health conditions.
Absolutely. We've said it a million times, but it's just so important. Personalized advice is key.
Couldn't agree more. So what's next for the deep dive? Any exciting topics on the horizon?
Oh, we've got tons of fascinating stuff lined up. But we always love hearing from our listeners, so if there's anything you're curious about, let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we're always open to suggestions. So until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and most importantly, keep listening to your body. It's the wisest guide you'll ever have.
Well, we've really gone deep on this one, haven't we? Fasting and infections. Who knew it could be so complicated?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of layers to unpack.
For sure. So as we wrap up here, what would you say, like, the most important thing for listeners to remember is, when it comes to making decisions about fasting and their health and all that?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that, well, there's no magic formula. You know what I mean? What works for one person might not work for another.
Right.
And what helps for one kind of infection might be totally different for another.
So it's not as simple as Dr. Berg makes it sound in his video.
Yeah, it's definitely more nuanced than that.
I guess that's why we do these deep dives, right? To get past those simple answers and really dig into the details.
Exactly. It's about, empowering yourself with knowledge, but also recognizing that everyone's body is different and that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to health.
Totally. So would you say that the best advice is to, like, listen to your body and talk to your doctor?
Absolutely. Those are the two most important things, I think. Pay attention to how you're feeling. And if you're considering trying fasting, definitely consult with your doctor first, especially if you have any underlying health conditions or you're taking medications.
Right. Always good to get that personalized advice.
For sure.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from those old sayings about feeding a cold and starving a fever to, the latest scientific research. It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it has. And the journey continues, right? There's still so much more to learn about fasting and the immune system and how it all works together.
Which means there will be plenty more deep dives to come. We're always on the lookout for fascinating topics to explore with our amazing listeners. So if there's anything you're curious about, be sure to let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we love hearing from you guys. Your questions and insights help shape these conversations and keep us all learning and growing together.
Absolutely. So until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep listening to your body. It's the wisest guide you'll ever have.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into fasting and infections. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Stay healthy.